Okay, it looks like first thing, take 5 minutes, the public survey updates. You guys have updates?
Just real quick, the survey is going to be open for another week or so. The school did send out a notice electronically to have people, make people aware of that and encourage people to take that survey. So as of this morning, we had 309 responses to the survey. I think we'll get a few more in over the course of the next week or so, but you know, it's not a bad response. I think it's going to be one piece. We've talked in the past about having the difference between a statistically significant, findings versus kind of a good data point, and we're already in that good data point range. So we'll see where we end up in the next week or so.
How does that compare to other towns that you've worked with?
I think this survey has been very well publicized, and I think the most comparable survey that I can think of in the last year or so was got about 140 something responses.
Oh, wow.
But it was not nearly as well publicized as this one was.
So is the date where it's going to be no longer available like a hard and fast date, or is it still
I believe it was the 27th that went out in the tax bills, but if there's a need to keep it open longer, we can. But at that point, it'll be about 4 weeks.
Okay. I had posted it in our neighborhood
Great.
group, so I just wanted to.
Yep. Keep promoting it. Keep making people aware.
So do we have enough to have like a good draw data from everything? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pleased with the response rate.
Okay.
Hey.
Sorry, I'm late.
All right. Anybody have any other questions, concerns? No? Okay. So number 2 on here is finalize early decision items discussed so far. First topic is public participation and input plan. If we have anything, yes?
Yeah, in your packets, I included a few different, I included the public participation plan that we discussed a couple meetings ago, and the comp plan vision statement that we discussed at the last meeting. And the idea here was to finalize, at least at this stage of the game, a few of the things that we've been talking about for the last few meetings. So just kind of going in order, the public participation and input plan is included in your packet. It includes details for each task where we're going to be reaching out and asking for either input or reactions or comments from the public, as well as the project timeline. So the only thing I'll point out on the timeline at this point is we are in September, and I think we've done a lot of the work associated with these items, and I think at this point it's just kind of getting this group's stamp of approval on these 3 specific things so we can move on to the October visioning workshop stuff.
So let's get start with the style, layout, color scheme, design. If you guys want to talk about that now, and then we can go back and talk about the values and the vision and stuff like that. Does that sound good? Yeah. So we looked at a bunch of different layouts. Does anybody have any preference as far as what you've seen so far? Do you have the ability to put up
I believe
some
I
of
do.
the ones that we looked at?
Yep. I'm good. So the idea here was just to kind of take the group's temperature on a few basic design considerations that we can take back to the design professional so that that person can start putting the templates together and thinking about page layout or colors, or if there's a particular template that the town of Gray uses. I've seen a few of the past planning efforts that I don't think we're going to be bound by any design considerations from previous planning documents. So it's really, if there's any preference for this group, when it comes to page layout, for example, is one of the things on the agenda. If you're looking at it in kind of this orientation, it displays better on a computer screen. So if you think most folks are going to be looking at this kind of paging through electronically, this may be an orientation to consider versus like this, which makes for a very nice printed document, but you can still do a nice printed document in this format. So I think that, you know, the design professional is going to have a lot of ideas and a lot of good comments for us, but I didn't want to just turn it over to that person without getting an idea of things that this group might have for ideas or important things to keep in mind.
Did anything stick out to anybody on the previous ones that we had looked at? Do you recall them?
I was just looking at them. I don't know if other people had a chance to look at them. Some of the links were broken for me, so I wasn't able to look at all of them. But the last one, which was the Golden City, Colorado one, I felt like it was extremely thorough and easy to follow, but it was also extremely wordy. So I'm not sure anybody's going to take the time to read like 30 pages of a completely full, I don't know if everyone can see, it's like the whole screen's filled with words, like page after page.
That's right, I remember that one.
Yeah. But I did like that they had laid out their goals against their values. Thought that was a really easy way to read how they were going to implement things against the value statements. Visually, I liked the Portland one the best. It's the most professional.
But did you? I actually didn't like the Portland one as much as
Oh,
some
really?
of the others. Yeah, but also I thought, hang on, I don't have them open right now, so I'm doing this from memory, which is probably not a very good idea. I wanted there to be a little more design to the Portland. I liked what was there, but I wanted it to be a little more. Plus, I was annoyed because they left the islands off, but that's my own thing.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that I thought the Golden Colorado one was a little busy.
It was busy. It was a lot of words, but I think the intent was good. The way they formatted the goals against the values
But there
on
was
each page.
Did you guys, anybody prefer more like picture color or more words? Or?
Something that stood out for me with pictures, like I think it was Wyndham's that had, or combination. South Portland used photos and mapping to kind of like outline their problems. So like a photo and then a map and then like a description, something. I think like visual aids with like a brief description helps like grab people's attention.
Yeah.
And I think it was Wyndham's that highlighted the 4 most important issues, or however 3 or 4. I think we should keep it under 5, whatever it is, over the next 4 or 5 years with examples of that. Something I think visually it's always helpful, especially when like summarizing something. So, and then we can get into the detail following that. I liked Portland too, but I felt like it was a little too much for Gray. Like, but I like the layout of it
Right,
and like the
that's-
professional look of it.
Exactly,
But
yeah.
it's just a little more than we need
Exactly,
here,
yeah.
I think. So,
I would agree.
what was the other city in Colorado that
Fort Collins
Fort
was the
Collins,
other
yeah, I
one.
couldn't.
That one was nice too.
Yeah,
Like
that- yeah.
spatially, I felt like
I
that was
liked that
well
one a
laid out
lot,
and it was
yeah.
more simplified.
Yeah.
But all the critical information was well laid out.
was there, and it
I like that one.
was laid out really. It was really easy to
It
follow.
was easy to
I thought.
follow, like you could understand it, not knowing the city even. I felt
Yeah,
like.
yeah. And I liked the landscape versus portrait better. I just thought it gave it a little bit more
Gives it
unity.
more width,
Yeah.
makes it easier to put stuff on it to read. And I've always been, ever since I've done web pages, pictures seem to work for me better than wordiness. And I think the old adage, one picture is worth 1,000 words, holds true on this kind of layout as well.
Especially when we're talking about like land use, people actually see
Yeah, land use,
visuals
what?
of
I
what
think
might
our
look
maps are
like.
important.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt like when I was reading my section and it kept referring to
I kept
things.
looking at the zoning
I've lived
map
here for
and-
35
yeah.
years, but I still
Yeah.
had to look, where is that? Where is it? You know, and so it really helped me to understand how everything fit together.
Like including that zoning map too, I think is important for
Yeah.
people to
Yeah.
be able to
Yeah.
have access
Yes,
to
I
this.
like that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of visuals are really gonna be helpful, because
Yeah.
even if we, like you, when looking at something like a table, there's a lot of good information in there, but you've gotta look at
You
the
need
table and
references,
stare at
like-
it. And I mean, I just gave an example of, here's a table of, for the transportation of volume, traffic volumes in different roads. Well, this makes a lot more sense to me. I can follow that, and it's actually ordered by,
Yeah.
the highest volume to the lowest volume, and I reordered my table over here to make that same thing. So I was able to comprehend it a whole lot better. Seeing both
Yeah,
are
I think for
helpful.
me, what would have been helpful is tying it into a map, because I look at all the street
Exactly.
names, and it's
Yeah.
like this road, but in front of this road, or this side of that road.
Southwest.
And I just can't,
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't picture exactly what section of the road that is, or not remembering
Exactly.
which side is east and which side is west. And so I think if there was a map that, we could color code each of that section,
And
those
draw
things,
lines.
and draw lines, then
Yeah.
that would be much, it would be much clearer.
Yeah, so I think a lot of visualizations are gonna help you comprehension so much.
I mean, certain charts and graphs are gonna be easily, without, you can have, there are definitely gonna be charts that we can have that you won't need to illustrate, but
Sure.
others may be much easier to read if they have a corresponding map that can tie into it.
And I think it's important, like I said, to have them sorted in a reasonable order. Some of them, there was no
Yeah.
order that I could tell. It wasn't alphabetical, it wasn't by volume, it wasn't, I mean, some of the
Yeah.
land use ones as well. It's just like, there is no, this is just a non, it's a random order. But there was a chart below, and the chart below was in increasing order. Well, normally when you look at those charts, the part that makes the most, the thing that you're most interested in perhaps, normally, is gonna be the highest one, but that's at the bottom. A lot of times it should be in decreasing order. So I found that to be
yeah.
consistent. So, and I know we're getting into the
Are you
details.
speaking of to the inventory chapters you're reading? or
Yes,
to-
yes,
Oh, okay.
yeah. But I think this ties into what kind of format we
Yeah.
want to have,
Yeah.
what kind of
Yeah.
visualizations
Sure.
and things that we want to have, but I'm getting way into the details.
No,
I mean,
but
I'm
that
guessing
makes a
that-
lot of sense, though.
Some of the same data and charts and graphs that are included in inventory chapters are gonna make their way into the plan, I'm assuming. Obviously not all of them, but certain ones perhaps that are being highlighted.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're gonna get into a little bit later this evening, is when we start looking at the inventory chapters, what are the things, the key trends, the most, relevant portions of this? What is this data telling us, and what are we hearing from the public, and how do those, impact what we're gonna do going forward? So I think that, the chapters, I didn't add up all the pages, and they'll probably, page count will change, but the idea is we wanna think about having some smaller section of actual plan. Maybe it's 30 pages, maybe it's 40 or 50 pages, I don't know. Maybe it's 20 pages that people are going to look at right at the beginning that'll give a sense of the most important things to cover.
But also, there's one other thing that I found reading thousands of other documents, that what in the front, if there's any kind of a key that can be developed, like yellow means unsafe, or blue means wooded, or whatever, any kind of a key that's linked to some of the pages, a key in front saying, this is how we've laid it out.
Yeah, like a table of contents. That's
Yeah,
separate,
something like that,
kind of
something explaining so people don't have to look at it and say,
the sort.
ah. And there's no explanation to tell them what we've done.
I think there was one that used colors, like it was printed on the side too.
It's the one that's up right now.
That one worked well.
So you can see over on the right-hand side of this
Oh,
page, there's a little
okay,
blue tab. So
Yep.
this is designed to
Yes.
be one of those 200-page print things, so you can see, the colors will go through the document. So this is the vision statement section and the community engagement, the intro. And then as you get into the inventory chapters, which I didn't include enough pages to show you, that tab will change color and it'll kind of move down the side of the
Yeah.
page.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Portland one. I think that's what I liked best about it was that it flowed well, like it made a lot of sense as you were flipping through it.
Like that first page where it had all the colors, if you click on one of them,
Yeah.
it takes you to the
Right.
section, that'd be nice too.
Yeah, I agree that the content is way more than, but,
Mhm.
But the way it's laid out is kind of interesting.
yeah.
And your point, I think, is an interesting one. I don't think that's how they have it set up on their website. Golden, Colorado did do that, so you could click on the
That's what I was
PDF and
thinking.
make it clickable up at the top here, and you'd jump right to those different sections.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes it user friendly, and so like, okay, all right, now I'm gonna go through, it's like, that's what I'm interested in, I wanna click on it, you go.
I think that's really important. It's
Yeah.
both, I mean, obviously print, which is a pretty
Yeah.
easily solvable problem, but definitely electronically also.
Everybody's used to an app where you can click on something and it does
Right.
an action.
Yeah.
Go
People are
somewhere.
not
Yeah.
gonna get engaged
Yeah.
if they can't get to what they wanna get to quickly.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, the ones that were just available as a PDF were sometimes a little frustrating because you're just,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
I
word.
don't want to download this whole thing.
Cumbersome, forever going through.
Not
language
everybody is
words.
able to handle PDFs
Exactly.
either. So making it as easy or accessible as possible. And any help we can give people to point them to the direction that they want to go in
Yeah.
is always good.
So, could we agree that you want a landscape? We want to do a landscape? Is that
Land-
okay? Is that-
landscape.
Yeah,
We did.
Yeah,
okay,
we did.
We like maps.
good.
Yeah, like maps.
Maps, landscape.
Navigability,
charts,
yeah.
visuals.
And in highest from lowest to lowest. You know, sort of like baseball ERA scores,
There you go,
highest to lowest.
yeah.
I had a question about who we're comparing ourselves with sometimes. If people are moving, let's say, out of Portland into the suburbs, we're only focusing on Wyndham, Raymond, heading east. We never really mention Yarmouth, and we don't mention Westbrook. And I know we want similarity to us, but at the same time, what are those other towns growing or not growing, fast or slow, and why is that case? You know, with Rock River Bend or whatever that Rock Road thing is. I think we should include other towns in the Cumberland County in some of these maps and charts, rather than just the people that are, I mean, South Portland, no offense, I worked down there, who cares? I'd rather be Westbrook or Yarmouth, it's a little closer, that they may want to get out of the city and more suburban or more rural.
And are you talking about within the comp plan document itself? It's
The
very-
charts, the data you're using.
Right.
You know.
It's very traditional just to have your town and the surrounding towns versus a couple towns away, or like
Yeah,
the towns
but
on.
why
the-
was South Portland put in there, but not Yarmouth? North Yarmouth is tiny. Yarmouth is more of a town, so why North Yarmouth and not Yarmouth? And why South Portland and
When it
not
comes to looking at the
So
data.
like
you
better
need.
comparisons.
Gorham or Westbrook, or around the corner that way?
Was Cumberland one of the towns?
Usually it is, yeah, it was on mine, yeah.
I think in some of mine it had Westbrook listed in the transportation stuff.
Okay.
But it didn't, and none of them went to North Yarmouth though.
No,
or
they
Yarmouth.
should though.
Yeah.
So if these data have different towns, like, then we're not always looking at everything.
And you're getting into the inventory chapter
Yes.
stuff. Yep. So I think the data is just as readily available for those towns. And then maybe it's just a matter of thinking about who do we compare ourselves to? Who do we think we're,
Yeah.
you know, a comparable community? Yeah, I know Yarmouth is a very similar overall population size.
Housing
Maybe
did
that's-
use North Yarmouth and Yarmouth.
I think it's also important to think about not just who we're currently similar to, but who we would like to be more similar to. And, you know, if we're comparing data toward, I don't know who that is yet, we haven't discussed it, but maybe that's a question we need to answer.
Well, that's a good point, though.
Yeah.
As part of our goal, do we see ourselves looking like Westbrook, for instance? Because I know that's a rapidly growing town right at the moment. And they're doing a lot of interesting things in Westbrook, but is that what kind of town we're picturing ourselves as?
Well, I think it also depends on how, like, the context that we're putting it into. I think we talked
Yeah.
early on whether we sort of vision Gray as being a bedroom community of Portland, or is it its own sort of place, not in the context of Portland? And so if we start comparing ourselves to the towns around us as more geographical comparison in terms of just what's around us, if we start comparing ourselves to other sort of suburbs of Portland, then we're sort of putting ourselves in that context of being a suburb of Portland, and maybe that's not the, maybe that's not how we want to look at it. It may be, but it may not.
But I think of it economically and housing and all that. If I work in Portland, which is the biggest employer, and I want to drive 30 miles up to Gray or 27 or whatever numbers, let's make a circle and see, okay, who else might they choose to move to? And why is everyone moving this way or that way and not our way? If
Yeah,
it's
identifying
based on
the underlying
distance.
currents of growth, whether it be commercial, residential, or anything really, because there's economic forces, there's, suitability to go to work in Portland where most people may work, and figuring out, all right, well, what is Gray? What are people doing that, say here, we may not necessarily be able to, write something that, I don't know, I had a point there, but I went, but anyway, I mean, there's things that just have, people move to Gray for their own reasons, and maybe identifying that, we may not understand it yet, and I think reaching out to the community is definitely important to understand that, because some of us may just not know. We might just be a bedroom community, but it's just, identifying the underlying currents, whether it be economic or social, whatever it is. I think it's a big thing.
I think it's very important too, because as other communities may saturate in one area, then, okay, where do they move to, or where do they
Right.
grow towards?
What are the reasons they're
And
moving
we have
here,
our
right.
projections of, okay, we've been growing at this rate, this rate, this rate, this rate, and so we think we're gonna keep doing that, but we aren't taking into account that the saturation
Right.
around us is hit critical mass, and then boom, we just grow very rapidly. I've actually seen that happen in a number of different communities near where I've, lived different times, where there's been a community in a place like, like Gray, which is between two cities, two major metropolitan areas, and all of a sudden, bam, it just happened.
Yeah.
So, we need to,
Well, I think what's happening now, though, is, and I think we're all aware of this, is that housing is getting incredibly expensive
Yeah.
anywhere close to Portland and around it. And we're kind of the first town that still has affordable housing. And that,
and an exit.
but that puts us in a bad position in many ways. If we don't have a good plan, if we don't have good protections for development, we could have some pretty willy-nilly development.
We're
that's,
at like kind of an
not good
interesting
for-
point in the town too, because a lot of the surrounding towns are a lot bigger than Gray, like Wyndham and Yarmouth and Falmouth and Cumberland, and it's relatively small given the proximity to Portland, population-wise. And a lot of the land here is, I build homes, that's what I do. So I'm the builder that comes in, brings his excavator in and builds on the property. But Gray is unique in that it allows, like me, I built my own home here because I could use, say, a 60-foot right-of-way and not go through planning board to build a home with a road frontage. So it makes it affordable, so somebody can afford to live on 10 acres, where Wyndham requires you to go bring your road up to standard. So it makes it not suitable for me to build my own house on 10 acres. I'm gonna maximize it and put 4 lots in, which is why you have the problems in Wyndham right now. There's just a lot of little underlying currents that, we can set up as, a vision moving forward. If it's, if we keep the ease for our people to make it feasible for them to use back lots, say, and have a large piece of land, where a lot of like towns like Gorham, if, like I say, a family owns 50 acres, but it's got a 50-foot right-of-way, this town allows you to put a house on a right-of-way on a dirt driveway, where Gorham, you'd have to bring an $800,000 road in with pavement, curbs, whatever else. So then you're gonna have a developer buy that because they're just gonna say, see you later. Where in Gray, it's like, yeah, I can throw a dirt driveway in for 50 grand and put my house in. So we have the ability to look at these items and really establish, do we want it to grow in the bedroom community, or do we want to kind of leave it the way it is? Because there are little things that can be done, and that's just what I've found, just from an economic standpoint, because when I'm spending money to build a place, it's all about feasibility, like that. It's going to cost too much or it's not. And that's a huge growth factor, and Wyndham hasn't recognized that. And same with Gorham, that's why Gorham and Wyndham are exploding.
All right, so those are great points, and I think we've got a lot of information out of that, and I think we can leave that for a little bit further down, because we've got about
Yeah,
60
I
minutes
digress, yeah.
60 minutes to get into all the chapters that we had to read. So, as far as content-wise, as far as the plan goes, style, layout, I think we're kind of leaning toward more of a color schematic with some maps, landscape. Are they gonna be able to kind of help us with more layout ideas? Are they gonna have some choices for us as far as?
Yeah,
Okay.
and the idea was to get some of this early feedback and then
Okay.
present 2 or 3 options.
Double
And
it.
maybe a little
Yeah.
more of this, a little less of that kind of thing, as we get
Okay.
Is
further
there
into the
enough to go
process.
in now?
Is there anything?
I think so. I think that, unless there were really strong feelings like we have to use this kind of font, or this is the color we use for all our
Not Comic Sans.
documents. But I think it's, that kind of idea about, maybe thinking about how this presents electronically, being able to click on it
Yeah,
in addition to how it prints out.
and making sure all the links are working.
Yes, and all the page numbers listed are correct.
Yes,
Okay.
that's always helpful.
Since we're talking about maps.
Don't have a real high bar. That's okay. You can get page numbers.
I think it'd be nice if maps specifically were clickable, where you could zoom in, or whether
that's
it's
good.
on some
Yeah, that's
other-
huge.
Because I find so many times on these little post, where are we? It's like, the resolution is bad and just really
Yeah,
hard to tell.
resolution
what's
is
going on.
bad.
Resolution.
It's true, yeah.
For our,
You gotta be able to
Okay.
see
You
it
would see some.
yeah.
to make some sense out of it.
And a lot of times you find these online documents, you click on any chart, you click on anything, and it goes full screen. So I
Yeah.
don't know what we can do with that, if that's a possibility.
That might
I
also
will-
be in-house with our website admin
Right.
versus,
I mean, usually with PDFs, you can do it as long as the map is not bitmapped, which I think a lot of the graphics in the,
Yes.
These
the
are-
inventories were bitmapped, so you couldn't zoom into them. But if we can try to have the final PDF be less bitmap, then we'll be able to, then you can just use the PDF, you can just zoom in that way.
Yeah, if they're added to the document as PDF, encapsulated PDF documents, then they'll zoom and do everything.
I will talk with the designer about that. I do not know how to do that myself, but she's much more.
No, she should.
She knows what she's doing.
I'm
more.
sure she does.
Yes, so,
And she's the same person who did Portland, right? Do I
Yes.
remember that right?
yes. And she's done a lot of other cool stuff. So it's one of the reasons I asked her to be on the team is because of the flexibility, and I think the creativity she brings. That you're not going to get a plan that looks like this, but she can take the ideas from around this table and come up with something that's going to be good for Greg.
Any other?
Yeah, I'm guessing most people who get their hands on this are gonna be looking at it online. At least that's the way that they're gonna initially get hold of it. People like to print. I don't like to print anything. I hate printing. But I printed this.
Yep.
So,
I mean, everybody's got a laptop or tablet minus me and a couple others, but.
I didn't even
I
think
don't
to
know.
bring
And I
mine.
have one, I just didn't bring it.
I didn't either. Didn't think of it.
Yeah.
I don't own a printer.
Oh,
There
well,
you go.
okay.
yeah, yeah.
Any
Are we
last-
supposed to decide if we are thinking of Gray as a bedroom community or its own? And I don't like the idea of being a bedroom community myself, but I don't know what anybody else
I
feels.
don't like being labeled that.
Yeah,
I think
Whether it is or not.
we'll probably hear a lot of opinions from the public on that, and I think that's one of those terms that means a little something different to everybody, I think, as well. So,
it means you've got no identity of your own. People just land there to sleep, to me.
I think we're all set with layout.
Yeah, I think,
Sorry.
That's what I'm hearing.
yeah, I think we're good.
Lots of great
So,
candidates.
to,
Okay,
I love
tell
it.
me to keep quiet.
No.
Vision statement.
And this was
Okay.
one of those things where I feel like we got a lot of good comments at the end, and this is on the very last page. things that people thought were still relevant, things that people thought weren't quite as relevant. But I don't recall we actually kind of all had said, okay, this is the feedback that we all kind of agree on, and we're going to use this in a portion of our October work, for example. We'll talk more about that going forward, but one of the potential ways to use this is to, give this to people who attend as a prompt and basically say, what do you guys think? And are there portions of this that are less relevant to Gray's future than they once were? Or what are the things we want to continue to emphasize? So before we did any of that work with the public, I just wanted to give this group a chance to react to it, provide some comment, and I think we did, but I just wanted to, it's on the agenda just to make sure that we were all set with it, because I think that sometimes when you introduce a topic and you talk about it, sometimes you might need a few days or maybe a week or so just to reflect on it a little bit and reflect on the conversation. So if there's anything new or there's anything else that people want to add, I think that'd be great. Otherwise, we do have some good comments from the last discussion.
I have a couple comments. One is not really on the value statement, but I don't like the vision statement. It just feels like the people who wrote it didn't know what the town was and didn't really know where it was going, and were trying to make it sound good for some ideas. That's very harsh, but I just really don't like it.
I agree.
And I feel like that might come together more once we've laid down the rest of the plan. Almost like we could revisit what we've talked about, and this is the summary of what our vision is right here. I feel like maybe they came up with this at the beginning and it was what they wanted to do, but I don't know if that's what really happened. So it's just my very general comment on that, but it needs a direction. We need actual steps. That's why I'm thinking maybe revisit for the specifics of what we put in our vision once we really have created our vision, which we're kind of still doing right now.
It's like X town, put X town in
Yeah,
this name. and it can fit
there's
any
no
town.
real sense
Yeah.
of community, and
Yeah,
that's what we're
exactly.
trying to pinpoint now, though, not a bedroom community.
Yeah.
All the self-sustainability that is here now, and hard workers and everything. So, I don't know, I'm not feeling this vision.
No.
In the comprehensive planning process, is the vision statement ever kind of written at the end rather than at the beginning, or is it usually a first step?
I would like to, and the way we've written out the proposal here, is to come up with a good draft after the October sessions. We'll have had Blueberry Festival conversations, we'll have had a lot of survey information, and we'll have some very focused discussion with the public at these meetings in October, as well as the follow-up focus groups we've talked about. I think at that point, we'd be able to have a draft vision statement. But I also think, maybe to your point, Jen, is that we could revisit that. I mean, it's nothing that we're gonna be doing until next October is gonna be written in stone. But I think having a statement of some type that would kind of document what we've heard from the public would be valuable as we think about the rest of the plan. And it's, I think, going to be worth circling back, but for a starting place, I think it's worth having something in place. Okay.
I
Yeah.
definitely don't like the first sentence of the vision statement, because this is what the comp plan is supposed to be about, is to try to help us get beyond a crossroads. So maybe we are right now, because we don't have a comp plan, but I think by the time we have a comp plan in place, we shouldn't be at the crossroads, we should be going down the road.
Well, isn't this
Here
the
is our
2003 comprehensive plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly we have progressed, if it's only adding more traffic.
That was back before the bypass and the exit
Right.
change. It really was the crossroads.
But it's still, to me, I mean, I don't react against it so much. I really like the sentence in the middle. It says, with carefully planned and implemented strategy, the community achieves its success, ensuring that the environmental assets are not sacrificed for short-term economic gains, that it's blah, 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 blah.
That's the only part I underlined that I like.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
like that part,
I like
because to
that.
me, that in a sense is, why I'm here, why I'm really kind of hoping that that's what we can do, is make a plan that will protect the good things in our town and do better at protecting it, and you know, also encouraging growth in a good way, you know?
I think everyone, I
Yeah.
think we were all in agreement that.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I
At least
like
most
that.
people will agree that they liked that sentence of
All
that
right.
vision.
I have more of a formatting comment.
Sure.
I think what I find challenging about both of these is that they're just it's like one paragraph of words that I feel like it's not very easy to read. Could we possibly have a vision statement that has maybe one or two overarching sentences with more like bulleted points about what our exact visions are in different areas? Because I do like that sentence about what you're saying, but it really speaks only to environmental assets for me.
And
I
it's-
mean, there's so many other elements of the town.
Well, it keeps
Yeah.
going, though, then it is.
But it's a long
But it's a long,
too.
yeah. that's-
It could be
so-
broken into more than one thought.
Right, and I
Yeah.
feel like it would be a lot easier to read and digest if
And
it
keep,
weren't,
yeah.
it weren't just one big paragraph, just,
Yeah. And could we not use italics?
Yeah.
Fonts, okay.
Sure.
Well, like, you look at like private corporations, they're good examples of vision statements, and they're never that long and never that wordy.
Exactly.
They're always very
And they
clear, you
often
know
have bullet
exactly.
points.
Right.
And you
You
can
know,
say
whether
that.
they're true or not, I don't know,
No.
but they're usually written pretty well.
Vision statements are supposed to be short and succinct.
But I think some of the goodness of this vision statement actually may get lost in the fact that it's hard to follow. Because the idea of the community coming closer even as we grow, that's a nice idea.
Oh,
I
yeah,
like
that's
that.
nice, that's a nice
I
idea.
mean, so I feel like there's some things in there that are, and certainly what you put, I mean, I think, like I said last time, I would change the end from the town of Gray becoming a community where people desire to live, learn, work, and play is to being one now, also, hopefully. But I feel like there's some, it's maybe not very specific, and I do like the idea of making it more specific, but I think there's some nice stuff in there, it's just a little.
but I think in drawing out the sentiments that we like and something
Yeah.
that's a little more digestible.
Has anyone
Yeah.
ever heard of a 1-3-5 format for like writing or like goals or anything like that? So basically it's one large overarching goal, which for example could be
Yeah.
community achieving its assuring environmental assets not sacrificed. And then 3, the 3 is your major, tasks, and then 5 ways to achieve those
Right.
tasks supporting your goal. So something like that maybe to kind of break it down might help.
Yep.
All right, on to our homework. How do you guys wanna do this? Wanna go right around the room and start with whoever, or should we go in order?
Maybe by chapter?
I would go by chapter, yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Who knows what number they were?
Sarah has.
I have a
Remember
list
what
right
number?
here.
I don't know. what
You got a
format, but I know
master
it's
chart?
subject.
I have it printed out here somewhere.
Number 1 is economy.
Yeah.
All right, so number 1, it looked like, so it's me and Joel have that one, so who wants to go first? I can go first, doesn't matter. All right, so economy, some of the, I guess, fun things about that, things that I learned. So according to this, Gray is experiencing some growth, unlike other communities in Maine where young families with children have been moving in. And that seems to be one of the big overall factors. Also, we participate in several regional economic initiatives. So Sebago Lakes Regional Chamber of Commerce, which supports individual community and business growth. You got the Greater Portland Council of Governments, so we work with them on federally designated economic development programs and things like that. The Gray New Gloucester Development Corporation, so they assist businesses and developers interested in bringing their business to Gray and New Gloucester, as well as existing businesses and commercial property, and helping them expand into the market, which I thought was pretty cool. We all know kind of how employment is here, but the pattern of it, as of 2015, 12% of the residents in the labor force actually work in Gray, which is down from 17% in 2002. Let's see, and also working from home has kind of gone down a little bit in 2016 to 6%. So more people are kind of straying away.
That was actually a percentage. There are actually more people working from home, but since there have been more people coming
in,
into,
yes.
that's what's brought it down.
Yep.
So like the gross
Percentage-wise.
number is the same, like the number of people?
The number of people working from
number-
home has increased, but not
It's
as
just-
quickly as the number of people
Yeah.
moving to
Gotcha.
Gray.
Yep. So I thought that was interesting. The most common place of employment for Gray residents is Portland, capturing 22% of the labor force in 2015. And Gray is obviously the most second common place for employment. And then outside of that, it's like South Portland and Lewiston were the next most frequented destination for employment. More residents are commuting to jobs in Lewiston, Westbrook, and Wyndham. And then Gray residents over the past 15 years, the destinations is shifting to more urban centers in the smaller cities. So let's see, occupational labor force. Most of the occupational profile of Gray residents is managerial and professional service, and then into sales and office. So there's a lot of managerial and professional in the area. Anything that you saw in there that was particularly interesting as far as?
Yeah, I took some notes too. Of course, I took it right on the PDF.
Did you?
That's why I had to bring my computer.
Gotcha.
I had some interesting things that I noted that I was actually wondering about the Gray's labor force. It says 2016, 75% of people aged 16 and over in Gray participated in the labor force, which comprised of 4,000 some. Okay, this rate is higher than the labor force participation rate in Cumberland County, which is 68%, and the state, which is 63%. And I'm wondering, why are we at 75%? What's driving that? So I'd be interested in knowing some of those drivers. Is there any questions or do we have any data to help us understand that?
Is Gray, as far as age, are we about the same as towns around us, or, because it said,
We're
somebody
actually
said.
younger, which
Well,
I found surprising.
Yeah, because somebody said more families were moving here, but I would think that would have to do with the
What's
labor
that?
force too, right?
Yeah.
And one of the largest employers across the state is education and health, and that kind of mirrors Gray as well. Education and health has a very strong foothold in our community.
So location of employment for Gray residents. You mentioned about 12% of Gray's labor force lives and works in town. And I'd be interested to know, are they business owners? Are they employees of companies? How's that, come into play? Because that would be interesting too. Are self-employed people leaving, or are they losing jobs working at businesses?
There was a part that said 78%, maybe it was the public workforce that works for the public administration in Gray, comes from outside of Gray.
Oh, well,
So,
that's funny.
yeah, right? I thought that was neat too.
So you mean like snowplow and stuff like that, by public works, is that what you mean?
Well, I think like just the administration, the whole administration,
Okay,
yeah, everybody, like anybody that works for the
so
town.
teachers.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I wonder if having a Hannaford in Gray has impacts that. I mean, they hire a lot of young
And
people.
old.
And Gray being a relatively small town, to have a pretty big, store like that, just in terms of your question about sort of the percentages, like why is the percentage of Gray residents working within Gray higher than normal, and maybe because we're a small town with a few particular employers that that tend to employ people who are local, you know, like a place like Hannaford, a lot of the,
Right.
like high school kids and, you know, people, or a lot of those jobs will be filled by people who live very close.
Good question.
Yeah, and the largest employers in town include Enercon, Hannaford, State Police, Yarmouth Lumber, Bruns Brothers, and then the school. That's the 15, so those are the biggest employers.
Gray's labor force has less than half as many people in the leisure and hospitality sector as the county and state, but it's still 17%. So it kind of sounded, when I read that, it was like, wow, we don't have very many. And then it went down and found later that was actually number 3. So number 3 employment type,
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
but it's still less than half. So why are we less than half? And do we want to change that? And what, you know, what kind of,
Well,
I think should be
we have really no hotels.
I know.
Yeah.
We have very few restaurants.
we have some lakes.
We
and
do have
rental
lakes.
apart- you know, rental.
Well, I think
Rentals,
they're
yeah.
small.
But our lakes don't have public access.
But if you're renting on the house on the lake, you have access.
Yeah. I guess they're just getting pizza. I don't know.
But it's a small number of, like, for that kind of enterprise, it's a small number
Right.
of,
Right.
And
excuse me, jobs.
Yeah, so just trying to understand
Yeah.
and, you know,
something else that I thought was interesting here about the Gray Village. One of Gray's top priorities is to preserve the village as a center for the community and commercial activities and future growth. Gray's location as crossroads in the county provides an opportunity for the village to expand its role as a center for convenience goods and services and attract businesses that enhance Gray's role as a gateway to recreational opportunities in western Maine lakes and mountains. And then it says, and it goes on to say that in 2006, Gray Village Master Plan contains findings and recommendations to improve the viability of Gray's downtown center and village. The plan addresses critical issues, including traffic, parking, sidewalks, blight, landscape, parks, historic structures, public infrastructure. And then, according to this plan, the absence of public sewer and lack of developable land limits the physical capacity of the village. So those are maybe some important things that we might want to tackle in.
That came up in the facilities chapters too.
Did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought when they put the bypass in, the Wilderness Way bypass, I thought that was gonna really improve the situation in the village of Gray, but it did not. It did not at all. Yeah, I mean, to me, that the way the traffic and everything is there, there's no sense of that being the center of our town. I mean,
chapter 6.
Yeah.
Which I have too. 1% of employment of Cumberland County is in Gray. What's our population?
Say that again.
1%.
1% of employment is in Cumberland County. 1% in
What page is that on?
page 9. I'll read it so I don't mess this up. As of 2015, the town of Gray hosts 2,233 jobs and roughly 300 businesses, representing just over 1% of employment in Cumberland County. What is Gray's percentage of population of Cumberland County?
That would be in the population chapter. But keep in mind, there's other counties nearby, so they are driving to Lewiston, Auburn for jobs.
Sure.
Right, which is a
So-
different county.
Yeah, but it just kind of,
Yeah, 1%.
it'd be nice to
That was
have
the
that
chapter.
stat. I mean, there are stats coming from different areas that would be helpful even in this chapter.
We're probably one of the smallest towns in Cumberland County.
Sure. Okay, retail trade. The share of retail employment in Gray is roughly equal to 98% of the share of retail employment in Cumberland County and 90% of the share of retail employment in Maine. This indicates that the town is capturing slightly less than the level of retail sales a town of its size could support with local demand alone. I thought that was a very interesting thing. And I had a comment which, okay, double click to get you up. No surprise, that's what I said.
Another thing I found, this is on page 10 if you're following on. With the proud heritage of farming, including many active farms, there's opportunity for the community to take advantage of this unique asset and increase agritourism, including outdoor recreation, hospitality, entertainment, education, and direct sales. So.
Direct sales?
Yeah, I don't know why that's in there, but.
That seems like an odd.
Yeah. I know, right?
Well, snowmobiles or selling snowshoes or
Apple
bikes.
by the
Yeah.
foot.
Right, no, I meant just in
Yeah.
that
I
sentence.
think that
it
would
should
be
have
the
matched.
farm selling products.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha.
But
There
the
you go.
world is, if Southern Maine now is so foodie, I mean, it's
Yeah.
so foodie, and we're famous nationwide in Portland. I think that's a really good, good point.
Yeah.
That's a way we could,
Page 15 has the phrase, enhance Gray's role as a gateway.
Yeah, I read that too. and I was-
Gateway?
Yeah, as a gateway, so that's our role, our role is a gateway. I don't wanna have that.
Oh, no.
we don't.
Oh,
I find that offensive.
Yeah.
That's the problem. You watch the turnpike and everybody is getting off, going down Wilderness Way and heading, to the lakes and other places. And we may not like it, but
I don't know, trying to get out of my driveway, they're coming down Route
Yeah, and-
26 from the
and
north.
Certainly, we are a gateway, there's
Yeah.
no doubt about that, but to say that it's our role, I think that bothers me.
I like being known as a bedroom community.
Yeah. But, I mean, we can, we can take advantage of that being a gateway, and I think that we can also be a destination too. And I think that we
Yeah.
need to find ways that we can be a destination more so than we are right now.
Yeah.
And that's why we are half of what everybody else is for the leisure and vacation. And because we're just a gateway and we're viewed as a gateway, and we're not doing anything ourselves to make that any different, so.
But we don't have oceans and we don't have mountains to ski on. So our elevation isn't quite for all that recreation. I'm just saying.
And then we have the inevitable commute. I mean, we've got the whole 26 corridor funneling in Route 26, getting on the highway, and that's their complete
Sure.
access to Portland.
But I think with vision, we can come up with some great ideas where we don't have to just be a gateway, where we can
Right,
be a
Sure.
destination.
we have
Right.
some of the best cross-country skiing. It's free and groomed, and
In Libby Hill.
that's what I mean, at Libby Hill, and they have it for mountain biking too. And I mean, people don't know about it, which for some of us is very nice that they don't know about it. But I'm just saying, it is something that could be more of a destination.
And I don't think either of these are in Gray per se, but the disc golf place.
Oh, yes.
There's one in Bryan.
In North Yarmouth.
I
that-
think
I
it's
think
in
it's
I think
in-
it's
yeah.
actually in
I think
North
it's
Yarmouth. I think
in
it's on the
North
other
Yarmouth.
side.
Bittersweet.
And then also Bittersweet, and then Pineland. These are apparently, I don't play disc golf, but apparently like two of the best. We've had people come and stay with us who come because they want to come.
No,
They
there are
want to play.
competitions.
Yeah,
at the
huge
Highland
parking
They
one.
want to play
Yeah.
at those locations because they're so
Really?
good. Oh, yeah. So
Really?
for,
And we're right next
it's
to
a
both of those.
huge, yeah, so, I mean, I think
There's no
there are
mountains, no
places,
lakes,
even
no
if they're
coast
not
there.
right in Gray, there are
Very
definitely
close.
destinations, things around us that people are coming here for. I'll say
Disc
us
golfing.
specifically.
Maybe you had mentioned.
We fall into
tying
that
things
category.
together.
I
But-
just never thought.
Yeah,
Uh,
that aren't mountains or skiing or
Yeah.
oceans, or there's plenty of stuff that,
So who
People
has existing land use?
And just maybe a little context, we kind of jumped right in here, but what Sarah and I are hoping to get out of this conversation this evening is some quick highlights, some of the important things. I think you posed some good questions, Joel, that we could dig into a little bit more. But to give you a bit of a preview, my hope is to use a lot of the conversation from around the table this evening as a bit of a introduction or some common background to the people who come to our meetings in October, so that we can all have some common baseline level of information to work with. So if, for example, we could say some things about the economy based on our conversation now, and then give them some questions and some things that they could react to that would help us think about the economy going forward. And the same thing when it comes to land use and natural resources and the other sections. So, I think ultimately, if we can come up with, 2, 3, 4 things, maybe a couple questions that we want to dig into a little bit more, that's kind of the flavor for what I was hoping we can get to, or get through this evening.
Okay. So, so existing land use, you have Heather, Jennifer, Joel. Anybody want to go first? Couple quick points.
Well, I made some notes about it. So, kind of to summarize everything, I don't want to go through each section, but what I took away from it, obviously there's a large portion of empty rural residential land. I think it was like 42.4%. I can't quite read it on the printout here, but a lot of gray is vacant land. An interesting part of that is 35 vacant parcels in gray that exceed 50 acres account for more than 40% of that vacant land. I thought that was interesting. Those are significant chunks. One thing I really took away from this, to the rural residential and agricultural zone, which is the biggest zone that covers a large portion of the town, allows for low density development. As we know, obviously housing demands are increasing, people are moving to town. Development pressures increase, the town may potentially lose a significant amount of the environmental assets that define the character of Gray. So I know that's something that people are concerned about. And that's in the rural residential and agricultural zone. So on that note, in reading some of the zoning restrictions for 3 areas that I noticed, I feel like maybe we should open it up a little bit more potentially. Village and Village Center District is 1, actually 2, it's split into 2. Building, I think it was business development and commercial zones. Those 3 areas, I feel like maybe we should focus on a little bit to maybe get more attention to, say, vacant properties. For example, like in the village center right across from Cumberland Farms, there's that strip mall and there's like 2 or 3 vacant things right in there. You know, things like that are, you know, right in the center of town, everyone's seeing this, it could be a huge moneymaker, and it's just sitting there empty. Stuff like that. Maybe if there's some way that the town or people could work with companies to get attention to those businesses or work with the owners or something. There are also restrictions such as building height allowance. In these 3 zones, the building height allowance is only 35 feet, which, I mean, you consider you want to keep the rural residential character of Gray. You wouldn't want to change that, obviously, in certain areas like the rural residential areas, but in the village center, perhaps that's something that should be considered. I'm not talking high rises, I'm just talking a little bit higher than 35 feet might allow for more dense population growth in the center and in the business and commercial zones. I think 35 feet is pretty restrictive. And also decreasing potentially the minimum lot area if water sewer can still accommodate it. That's another thing that could allow more businesses potentially, or multi-unit housing developments potentially. One thing that I did like that was in there, and you had touched on that too, is building restrictions. Currently there are not as many for single family and residential, and I think that's a good thing. For the same reasons that you mentioned, but there are for multifamily and anything 2 units or more. So I kind of think that's good because that's going to prevent things from like what's going on in Windham and Gorham and those towns that are exploding right now. That did not have those restrictions. It does put up a little more roadblocks for people, but it allows for more sensible planning. That's not going to go off, you know, in every direction and put even more burden on our infrastructure that's not able to handle everything as well as it could be currently. So, and that leads me to putting more into the infrastructure in those 3 areas, especially the village and village center districts. I mean, obviously crosswalks and sidewalks, making sure that, you know, lighting, all those little things, I think, in those key areas to help promote business and draw people to the town would be huge.
And also, you're talking about kind of improvements in the village.
Mm-hmm.
I have noticed a couple of times when I've been, unfortunately, there long enough to wait by a light, to wait until thousands of cars go by, and notice that when you're coming up from the lower Gray Village, there are people who do not know that they have to go around that stone thing there, and I have seen 7 people go down that last lane
I know
there.
that way every
Fortunately, they
morning,
didn't
so-
run into anybody.
Yeah.
But there's gotta be a better,
Several-
there's gotta be a better way.
Supposed to yield there, it's
But
all
it-
just.
I
No.
can see why
That's
they
kind
make the
of like-
mistake, though. It's a terrible intersection. If you're coming from
It
that
is.
direction, and especially
And
if
you
it's
don't
night,
know.
or if it's snowy, you can't see that you're supposed
You
to go
can't
that
see the
way.
yellow line on the road.
No.
You guys all like chapter 6 a lot.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, there are things
Right.
that way that we're fortunate we have not had great disasters that way, but
No.
perhaps because people coming up from the turnpike recognize that people don't have a clue and go slow. But that's definitely not a good thing.
yeah.
You know, one of the challenges we have with Gray Village itself is a lot of traditional towns are built on a grid of some sort, where they have side streets, and
Yeah.
they go like that. Gray doesn't have
It's
that.
like Boston, it just
Yeah.
was.
And part of the reason we don't, and probably will never have side streets, is because of what we're adjacent to. We're adjacent to a cemetery and an interstate. We're adjacent to, there's a gravel, wherever we are, over here. There's a gravel pit quarry that's
Yes.
off of North Yarmouth, north of that, so you're not gonna
And
expand
there's one
there.
off 26.
And.
We have one side street,
it-
the library.
Yeah, exactly,
It's the only-
right, and,
It's the only
or
side.
maybe you could think
I
of
hadn't thought
Brown.
about that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly, but we don't have a grid system, and we don't really have a good way to make a grid system, because the roads are kind of all crossed, and they've filled in with houses.
You might say
and-
crossroads.
Crossed roads. Crisscrossed. And so we don't have, and will never have, apart from demolishing homes and putting in those kinds of streets, we don't have that kind of land use as others, and building out based on a grid system.
And there's no space.
And this isn't
We're-
chapter 6, this is land
We
use.
would literally have to lose buildings
Yeah.
down there,
Yeah.
I mean, to do
Yes.
something, so yeah, that
So it
was
really
my
comes into
biggest
play,
take.
yeah.
Is we focus on those three areas really to help boost the economy and get more businesses, more jobs and all of that. And it's a lot nicer, it would be a lot nicer to look at when you drive into town too. There's full businesses and,
Mhm.
a gas station where that's not falling apart and stuff like that.
The one thing these pages and narrative don't describe is like a culture that maybe some of us aren't aware of why they are the way they are. Like, some of the owners may not see a vision that we see, so.
Yeah, so how can we all get on the
Right,
same page,
so,
like?
so it's all this on the paper, but when you talk to the people, some of these great plans that get in place, because if people's like, gosh, darn, I'm not gonna do what you want me to do. So it's taking it off the paper and working with the human element of why aren't these plazas developed and things like that. So we
Right.
have to be aware of that when we have
And
our
what type of
open
businesses
meetings.
are they trying to attract? And what, improvements and things that they wanna do or don't wanna do?
Or do these owners even live in Gray? And I hear some of them
Right.
don't even live in the
Right,
state.
like who is
So,
Craig Care
you know, it's not
Associates
like
that's
they
managing this?
care how it looks, because maybe they just care about money.
Right.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's some of the reality.
Well,
There's
if they make it more attractive to lease out their spaces, they're
They're
gonna
gonna
make
get
more
more
money,
business.
so it works for that argument too.
I know, I'm
in
saying
theory.
we're not seeing that human element of like why things aren't changing or,
That's a good point, because I think the biggest takeaway I had from all the chapters I read was that have over the last 10 or 5 to 10 years been so many plans made, like really thoughtful things the town has worked on. There was the 2006 master plan, there's like a forest initiative for trees and traffic studies, and there's a monument square plan. And it just seems like all of them have stalled out, and I'm just curious, I am curious too why that is.
I
and
know
what
some of the
background-
story, but you need like a town planner here
Right.
and
Right,
other things.
Yeah, one of the
Well,
things.
that would be helpful for us.
right, because then we're not making the same mistakes,
Right.
or we can incorporate what's already been done into
Yeah,
things we're doing.
because, I mean, if we're pouring all this time into this, having that background information would seem critical.
And the way we have some control over some of that is with design standards, which is one of the things in
Yeah.
this chapter. It's on page 12. And You can't go retroactively, but for any kind of improvements or any kind of things, or maybe even have some kind of tax assistance or whatever. If we have strong, detailed design standards, that can really
Yeah.
go a long way. I mean, you and I were talking about that, how
It's huge.
different communities have put those in place, and the initial response may be pushback on that. But
We may not be able to help Mr. Mike's, but anything that's getting built or redeveloped, you can, you know, you can have a say in, all right, well, if you're gonna pull a building permit for this commercial property and you gotta see the planning board, they're gonna tell you, all right, these are our design standards. And the
Yeah.
whole community would have had input through our committee, and they would have implemented it through the various methods here in the town, and all of a sudden, I'm the business owner, and I've gotta follow those rules, and I'm gonna build the business, cause I choose to redevelop that property, and
there's
all of us
another-
get to look at a nice property, and because we all
I
wanted
know
that.
that happened with Cumberland Farms and with the Hillview Mini Barn, so that's in place. The problem is, some of the other properties aren't changing
They won't,
owners or land use to get that fresh look that we're
eventually, it
hoping.
takes a
Yeah.
long
takes
time,
time,
but
yeah.
but it will, like, at least in a 50-year plan, you're not gonna get it in 10 years, you might not get it in 20, you might not get it in 30,
But
but
you get it for all the
overall.
new buildings and all the
Right.
remodels.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe, like, obviously Cumberland Farms have their own design standards, you know, their buildings are all the same, they didn't care what we, you know, there's no design standards, so that looks like County Road and Gorham, it's the same building, it doesn't matter. Cumberland Farms is gonna build it just because it's their brand, but if Gray had said, no, we like, you know, brick with granite over the windows, we want this, Cumberland Farms would have done it if they were gonna fix their building.
Exactly.
Think of the McDonald's in Freeport.
Great
Yeah.
example, great example.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Freeport did a great job of incorporating, and that's kind of was my point on the first meetings, was incorporating that historic aspect that we do have, which is another chapter. And, you know, combining it with land use and design standards, and I think we could really, you know, maybe not today, like I said, not 30 years, but maybe 50 years from now, for our children, they could look at a pretty nice town. You know, and actually, yeah.
And when Rite Aid first came in, didn't they have to change their design to, from what they had planned to something a little bit less garish? I think I remember that. Of course, it doesn't look anything like that now, but, so they will, my only point in that is businesses will abide by standards if, you know, if they're reasonable and they have a point to them. We
I know
want,
that the planning board is always looking, they'll follow the ordinances that are on the piece of paper, but they don't give that sort of warm fuzzy, like, what do we want it to look like you said, the.
Yeah.
There's no
Freeport,
design
McDonald's.
standards.
There are.
There are.
Well,
There
well, there are, but
are.
not like a brand.
Yeah, but they're not a
Exactly.
brand. There's
That's
not a
what I
brand.
guess my point, yeah.
We need a
So
brand in
the
our
planning
design
board would like to
Exactly.
know
Do we have
from
a
this
copy of the
plan,
current design
how
standards,
to
or would we-
whip it into shape.
There,
I agree with that,
the
yeah,
site
yeah.
plan
Yeah.
review ordinance, the design guidelines, and there's a difference between guidelines and standards. Are, I believe in the site plan arts, we can get those out electronically to the clerk.
Okay.
well, if we
I'd be
decide we
curious
wanted
to
to, we can
see what they
always
currently are.
implement
Yeah,
standards in our
Fairly generic.
thing.
And a lot of the types of things you're talking about, historic character, design standards, and having to do with, you know, the idea of, you know, implementing a plan and how to make it happen and dealing with people on the other end of the plan are a lot of the things we're gonna talk about when it comes to goals and strategies. These inventory chapters are really meant to provide kind of a status update of acres of vacant land, numbers of jobs, labor force, those kinds of things. And I think GP-COG did a pretty good job. They snuck a few recommendations into these things, but I think of these chapters, you know, these are just the facts. Let's just, you know, how you doing? What's the status with this? How many square feet have we got available over here? What are the minimum lot sizes? And then from that, we can start to pick out, you know, what are the most critical things to address that are really going to move the town forward, or things we need to address that are holding the town back that need to get dealt with. And then from that point, we can start making some specific recommendations. So I love where the conversation's going, and there's a lot of good ideas around here. What I'm hoping to give folks at this meeting in October is like, hey, look, here's the facts. the town has issued X number of building permits, is that good or bad? Or like, there's been X amount of redevelopment in town, is that enough or not? You know, like, I will do my best not to assign value to some of these things we're talking about, but I think that a lot of the things that have been brought up so far have been really interesting points to raise, like getting people to think about what kind of community is Gray, and we can do that by talking about jobs and housing and vacant land, those kinds of things. And you know,
It helps start the conversation though. I know it's like tangents and like,
Yep.
but even though it's spin-offs, it gets the conversation, the juices flowing, where like sometimes just facts are just like, okay, whatever, you know? You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
at least if it's like, all right, I'm gonna say something, somebody's like, no, I disagree with that, that's great, because then they're like, okay, there's my opinion. It gets the conversation going. I think that's good though.
Yep.
But I have noticed that some of the businesses that have started lately have been small businesses. Like Dr. Kinney took over the Lady Slipper, and it's now an animal clinic. The old church going just out of town is now becoming slowly a wedding venue. The post office is Morrison House. And they're all small, well, Morrison House isn't small, but, you know, it seems to me we're tending, at the moment, I'm seeing smaller businesses. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. Certainly, we perhaps need some larger businesses to support the economy, but I think smaller business, and we've got the eatery, the Locavore place back of the One Gray Center. It used to be the flower shop.
Logocentric, it's a store.
Lococentric,
Yeah.
yep, Lokery, okay. But they're small businesses.
Right.
And Karen's Flower Shop, it's a small business.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I like small businesses. But it
Can I
seems to be growing
suggest
here in
we-
Gray.
Yes, we
Because
need-
I think
yes,
we've
we
been
do.
like
Sorry.
going through two of
Yeah,
these in
we
40
do.
minutes, so.
We need to keep going, yeah.
Yeah.
So any, one last one or 2 points on existing land use?
Yeah, so two things, I don't have much to add, but two things that sort of struck me in this chapter was one right at the beginning talking about Gray's assets and the land use patterns. The three things they brought up as our strong assets, the three things they decided to point out were the downtown village area, a trail network, and a growing number of young families. All of which are true and all of which are assets, but are very different things. But I just thought in terms of a discussion, it would be, with people at out in October, it would be interesting to sort of see what they thought those three things meant or could be.
Good.
And the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting is in that same section, it talks about how Gray is primarily a bedroom community with 90% of the residents commuting outside of town for work. And in the actual discussing the different zoning, and I'm hopefully going to be able to find it quickly, when they talked about this, because they did talk about how in the last comprehensive plan, sort of maintaining our environmental assets was something that was really important, and we're not necessarily holding true to that as we're growing, that's a problem that we've got. But one of the things, right after the design standards that you brought up on page 12, they talk about the subdivision ordinance. And there they do seem to have developed, whatever the right word is, guidelines, standards, mandates, whatever, that do sort of stick with that comprehensive plan goal. And I wondered if that was sort of in line with the idea that at the time they were thinking, hey, we're going to be becoming a bedroom community. So the subdivision place was a place where they made sure that the zoning ordinances fit what the comprehensive plan vision was. Just in terms of minimizing impacts from new subdivisions and maintaining natural and cultural resources. So that was another piece that sort of jumped out at me.
That's good, good. All right, anybody else on that?
Oh, and one more, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is, at the very end of the chapter, it points out that we do actually have the administrative capacity in our town to enforce our ordinances, which is great. We have a development director, a town planner, 2 code enforcement officers, a tax assessor, and 2 administrative support staff to manage the town's land use regulation program. The staff capacity exceeds that of most other neighboring communities and is adequate to ensure that the community enacts and enforces policies that will achieve the town's desired land use goals of maintaining rural character and preventing sprawl. So it's nice that we do have
And they do.
the support system that we need to
They do.
so, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's
Just- I would suspect a lot of towns our size don't have that.
Good.
It was a good time to bring that up. Because Kathy's.
Next one is housing. So if we can keep this rolling quick, like 2-3 points. Jennifer or Cole?
Yeah, I had housing too. I mean, it kind of goes along with land use, for me anyway. You know, projecting population growth in the village and more away from ideally the more rural areas, to protect those resources. Back to the, you know, possibly increasing the building height in those zones in certain areas. Parking standards was another thing too. With multi-units, currently there's a parking standard. If you have more than 2 bedrooms in a multi-unit building, you have to have at least 2 parking places, which is kind of restrictive. I mean, you're talking about the sizable parking lot for like a 4-unit building is, you need like 10 spots. So something like that, I think should be taken a look at. Possibilities for senior housing, all of that. Current, what is it, another note I made, currently, the town, or within the town, 5 residential units per year need to be added in order to keep up with population, the 2% per decade in population growth. So I thought that was interesting, 5 single unit per year need to be built, which seems like a really low number to me.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I was very
As I
curious
was
about that.
reading through it, that did not seem to jive with.
Yeah,
No.
I don't
Like
understand how
5
that makes.
single-family homes?
Well,
Is that the-
5,
Well, I
yes,
think that
5 units per year
Yeah,
need to be ordered.
I thought the interesting thing about the way that this particular chapter, or what we want to call it, looked at, is it looked at the population growth statistics and then used that to sort of say either how necessary additional houses would
To
be.
project.
As opposed to, I mean, you could look at it the other way and say, it's sort of like, it's not a, you know, if you build it, they will come kind of way of looking at it, where as opposed to saying, if we build, you know, 20 houses, are those houses gonna get filled? It's like it's building houses in order to meet the population growth, which is just sort of this projection, as
Right.
opposed to building houses in order to attract more population, if that's the goal. It's sort of like,
That's like the maintenance
But I don't
numbers.
understand
Yeah.
that. They built 2 houses on my street last year, and they're both, but I don't.
And they're both sold and filled?
Yeah.
Well, the thing, and this is, I will only jump in very quickly. Between 2000 and 2016, I think they were adding something on the order of 29 or 30 average annual building permits per year. And then in the next sentence, the comp plan chapter said that, you know, in order to keep up with demand, they'll have to build 5 units per year. So going from 30 to 5 didn't seem to make sense, but I think they're relying too heavily on a state projection that's probably too low for population.
yeah.
So we'll look at that. That definitely caught my eye as well.
Another statistic I thought was interesting was occupancy. 82% of Gray's 3,665 housing units are occupied, 18% are vacant. But of that 18%, 14% of the vacant units are seasonal. So.
Well,
So are they vacant, not being used as seasonal, or are they
The
vacant?
rest were temporarily vacant due to transition between tenants or owners, renovations, or other factors.
So they're not counting those seasonal houses, really nobody lives there even during
Right.
the summer, okay.
Percentage of renter occupied units was 19% in 2016. conversely, according to their stats, it's becoming less affordable to rent in Gray. So whether that's because of the commute issue or lack of jobs, contributing to all that. Median home price, only increased 8% compared to 9% for, in Wyndham or surrounding communities was a lot more than that. Let's see, I thought that was interesting. Gray home prices remain an average 10% lower than Cumberland County average prices. So Gray is still on the lower end of that, so. Those are the biggest things I took away from that. So it all supports everything that we've been talking about. We're kind of right in the middle. Median home price, $245, so. Even though, what is it, county-wide median income would only be able to afford $230,000 home, so. It's affordable, but it's still not affordable. But
Anybody else on housing? No?
She pretty much took
You got it? Got it? Okay. You got it all? All right. All right.
Yeah, it was really
Okay, good deal. All right, so, natural and water resources. Anybody wanna take a shot at that? Go ahead.
I was very surprised that all the lakes in Gray are in the category from the state that's most at risk. They were all, and had a lot of pollution and a lot of problems. They were all in that category of most at risk. And pretty much all the streams, ponds, and rivers have non-point source pollution issues caused by leaking sewers and sludge and salt from roads and all that. But pretty much all of them seem to have that problem. And I was shocked with every section I read about pretty much said that there were developments without sewers, and there were just like that was a problem pretty much everywhere in Gray, which just kind of surprised me, especially where who was saying about all the, that there were so many people to be sure that things were up to code and all that, that I was surprised that this was such an issue. Maybe it is in every town, I don't know. This is my first reading on these things. There isn't much land in conservation in Gray. There's 1,300 acres in conservation, which sounds like a lot, but there's currently 16,000 acres of unfragmented land that's, that's just, good land. Someone else touched on that, of how many people own large tracts of land. But none of them are in any type of conservation except for the 1,300 acres, and we can pretty much in our minds think of what most of those are. And the only other thing I have is there was a list of scenic spots in Gray that, should be preserved. And it only listed a few, and it surprised me. I mean, I just and I knew of one that wasn't on the list, and I just figured that probably all of us would have someplace else that would be considered really scenic that wasn't on the list. And that's all I wrote down. I don't know who else read it.
Yeah, I think very similar there, and I think one point, I'll just make a point, just trying to get through, but I noticed that in the survey of the soil suitability, that Gray is really bad suitability for basically designing wastewater disposal systems, so maybe that's, and foundations and such, but it seemed that, and slopes, so suitability versus slopes and soil types. So maybe, that might have just been a factor in its original development while we're still a small town. I think, but that was interesting to me. And over by Depot Road, there's 25% slopes, which is pretty steep. And, yeah, interesting.
Well,
So-
it's pretty hilly everywhere.
It is.
I ride my bike a lot, and pretty much everywhere you go, it's like, oh,
Yeah. Well, I own Varney Hill, and it goes up 100 feet in elevation from my house. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
100
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah,
And
100
lots
feet.
of streams, lots of streams. And, yeah. I was also surprised, I didn't write this down, but I was surprised how much protection there was for vernal pools,
Mhm.
which I didn't expect. I'm very happy that there is, but
Right.
there is a lot of protection for vernal pools. Yeah.
But on the flip side, I was disappointed in how little protection there is for wetlands.
Well, how bad shape they're all in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Every body of water is pretty much in,
Well, and I think part of it is that things are so broken up, but once you look at it as sort of one big system, there's not a protection for that piece in place, because, and I think probably because it is so sort of, broken up in little tiny little sections, which, you know, if you're sitting right next to one of them, it doesn't seem like such a big deal, but once you look at it as the whole, it's something that you'd need to.
Well, most of, I'm
Watershed.
assuming that most people in Gray have their own septic systems, right? There aren't many people that are on any kind of system.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Is everyone on their own?
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
even.
no-
There's no sewer.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no public.
But there's no, other than when you need a new one, when you put one in, nobody ever looks at them again, right? I mean, I've lived there for 35 years, nobody's ever come to.
buy or sell a house.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I had to put a new septic system in when I moved there 35 years ago. And they were very strict, which I'm glad of, you know, how big your leach field had to be and all that. But no one's ever checked it again, you know. So, I mean, there, you can see how these things could be happening and draining into the stream or going downhill to your neighbor's well or.
I read somewhere that there is a requirement that they do look at them, but then it wasn't obvious, or it wasn't explicit how it gets enforced
Yeah, I mean, how would you look?
or managed, that they get checked.
Yeah.
And the data gets sent back to the town, it was somewhere in here.
Yeah, and then all the houses around lakes and, you know, and all our lakes are completely surrounded by houses and leach fields, so, yeah. I don't know.
All right, anybody else on natural resources, any other points? No? Okay. Population and demographics, we had,
I had also, I thought I had signed up for this
Oh,
one, so I can
okay.
also
Oh,
chime
well,
in,
there
but
you
Lacey, why don't you go?
Well, I
ahead.
didn't have it printed and I like paper, so I was more critical of like the content is gonna be used. But some of the facts were already mentioned in housing and other things, but you can have a stab at it.
Oh, well, the thing that was most surprising to me was that Gray was younger than I thought it was. I really had the sense that Gray was, the median age would have been above the main average, which was, of course, pretty old to begin with. So I was surprised that it was younger than the median. That was not the sense that I had, and I guess maybe it is the young families that are moving in that's brought that age down, but I'm not sure how. Just that it's, I think that perception versus reality is really interesting, and I'm not sure how that plays into kind of what we're doing, but I think definitely having that be part of a discussion about, you know, with in when we do the survey.
Talking with the public.
Yeah, you're talking to the public.
But didn't it say something like the 35 to 45 were getting older?
Yes, that's
And
true.
the one just below them, people weren't moving into that age bracket? But then all of a sudden there were these families with 5-year-olds.
Right.
So I don't know how you can have more families with 5-year-olds, but not have the parents that produce them. You know, do you have that age? It was just weird.
Yeah, well, I think they, there was something about this, the age of first marriage increasing.
Yeah.
So it's older people having younger kids.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Um,
That's true everywhere.
So if that's the case, then that makes sense, but I was just worried,
Yeah,
it's saying we're not getting the people just out of college moving into our town.
right.
Because
We're not
people
getting that
out of
age.
college
That's true for
aren't
Maine.
buying
Yeah.
houses.
They're not
They
buying
can't
houses,
afford to
they're
buy a
renting.
house.
They're not.
So,
Young people
No,
cannot
young-
afford to buy.
No.
They're living in cities.
Yeah.
Right.
And then when they have their kids, they can't afford to move to Falmouth. So
Right.
they move to Gray.
Yeah.
That's a true story.
Yeah.
It is.
You speak from experience?
it said the average household size is 2.4 or 2.8, but then when it talked about those vacant homes and the number of people those vacant homes occupy, it averaged, it used a 4-person average. I'm like, why would you use 4 if our average household size is 2.5 and 2.8? Because then you're assuming when those vacant people come, they're gonna have more trash or something. Yet, there's only 2.5 people in a vacant house, not 4 in a vacant house. So it seems like an artificial explosion of people renting these vacant, you know, seasonal homes when the number should be the
And the
average.
families aren't
of
getting
2.5.
bigger, and just in general, families aren't getting bigger, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
I don't know
really
why they
make
said
sense.
4 when the average is 2.46 and 2.85.
And then I was also sort of intrigued by the population projections again because of this sort of reverse engineering that seemed to me was kind of being used or not taking into consideration something Joel mentioned earlier, which is, I mean, it says that it's the predictions are based on like trends in the region and the nation, but I think it's possible that there could be, especially with larger immigrant populations coming into places like Lewiston and Portland, that's gonna push people out. So if there are events like that, I don't know how much those kinds of things are taken into consideration in the neighboring sort of population centers that are potentially have the potential to push more people to Gray. And then, so seasonal was, I was surprised that there wasn't more seasonal population with some of the lakes, but I guess our lakes are relatively small, so.
What percentage was seasonal?
Well, it doesn't give a percentage.
Oh, okay.
Be nice to know.
481 seasonal housing units in 2000 grew to 574 in 2010. So, I mean, it's less than 100 increase of units, which is not very much. And then the last thing that was sort of I bumped up against a little bit is under education, it says Gray has a well-educated population. But then the two statistics it used were that 60% of adults are high school graduates and over a third are college graduates. By contrast, 50% of adults in Cumberland County are high school graduates and 44% are college graduates. But you can't be a college graduate and not be a high school graduate. So really if you're really looking at how well educated the population is, the number that, at least the way I understand it, would matter is the 44% versus
The college graduates, you're saying.
over a third of, and I'm not sure, it says 60
I think
or.
they're just counting these not as high school graduates, right? I think
I don't
they're-
think
The
you can
highest
do
level-
that
it's
because
usually the
then
highest level
it's
you've
the
attained.
highest level.
Yeah.
So
But-
the person, it doesn't really
Yeah.
make sense.
If it's the
because
highest level,
if
it makes
it's-
sense.
Well,
So
it's
are they
saying,
trying to-
it's saying 60% of adults are high school graduates
that's the
and a
highest
third are college, but is it a third of the 60%?
No,
No, no,
no,
no,
30-something
no.
A
percent.
third of the
are
total, so
college.
30%
Yeah.
are college, but that's less than 44%.
So what they're
Right, so
saying
this
is that
adds
the
up to
remainder
94.
percent is very small in Gray, that we have at least a high school or a college education.
But then if you add up the other two, it's 94%.
Right.
We'll look at that.
Yeah.
It says by contrast, which seems to be saying it's, when you say it's well-educated, and then you say by contrast, the
Yeah.
other area is not as well-educated.
Exactly,
The
yeah.
numbers should be greater, not
Right.
less, but they're less.
Yes.
Right.
They
Yeah.
didn't use
That
the
makes
same terms when they compared to other towns. I think if you just want to go without saying that there's some errors in the way it was written, is other neighboring towns have more people with master's degree or PhD kind of thing, is how I took it. The very last two sentences,
Yeah.
our neighboring towns have masters and PhDs, and we have a little bit less of those. So we're educated, but we're not as well educated as other towns.
We'd be dumb.
I don't know if we are or not, I just didn't, the numbers didn't seem to make sense,
Yeah.
which is
It's
maybe I'm
weird
not
the way they say
educated.
I was gonna say, the irony of that is not lost on you, right?
And then the last statistic is, guess what, we're pretty white, so.
No,
No,
really?
hadn't noticed.
All right, any last thoughts on that one? Okay, so we have roughly about 15 minutes to get through the next 4 months. So, 6 is transportation.
Do we have any?
Page 10, it says just over 88% of Gray residents commute outside of the town for work. I kind of like to keep the same numbers. The other, the economy chapter said nearly 90%, so that's just, quibbling maybe.
Consistency.
What percentage?
It said in this chapter, just over 88%, but in the economy chapter it said nearly 90%, so
Yeah.
what
They
is it?
rounded up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
'Cause when I read the economy was second, it was like, I thought I read somewhere that it was 88%, so.
Tomato, tomato, right?
Yeah, potato,
Um,
potato.
Somebody was told not to repeat, so like.
But this is a great inventory chapter because it lists all the culverts and the bridges and just, it's a lot of real boring stuff if you don't really find that interesting. Something that came up with housing was, well, this actually is related to housing. The towns of Casco, Bridgeton, Bethel, and Naples, why is there no E Bridgeton? Combined adding over 1,750 seasonal housing units from 2000 to 2010. The growth of seasonal housing in this region may contribute to summer traffic in gray that's not captured by the seasonally adjusted traffic count data. So I thought that was interesting and kind of ties in with housing too, like how does that, our own seasonal units change?
Does it mention anything about possible bus transportation or train
It talks
transportation
about
or
mass transportation.
mass
but it
transit
doesn't
of
talk about
any
the
form?
possibility of it.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
And then you get feasibility.
It's all like next door, like
Yeah.
Wyndham has it, so, yeah, that's it.
High crash locations. There were 3 high crash intersections and 9 high crash road segments in gray for the 3-year period, 2015 and 2017. And it wouldn't be surprising to know that those are the ones that are most congested. One of the highest is right along here in town. And North Raymond Road is another one. And by the turnpike. So, I mention those because those are things that have the human element. That's not just an inventory of a bridge and a culvert. It's like, what could we do, to help with our traffic situation?
I had a question, you're hitting on a lot of points I had, but the thing I noticed reading this chapter was that so many of our roadways we're not in control of, like the state manages them, or like there's 2 different state agencies that manage roadways in and throughout Gray. And I was just curious, like how much say the town has on changes that can be made to those roadways. Like if we decide we want to make changes, is there a process we have to go through with 2 different state agencies to make changes on major roadways?
Well, at the Blueberry Festival, I had a good conversation with someone who works in transportation. And he said, people have asked, how do the people in Falmouth get, that nice roundabout with all the landscaping and, all the money for that? And we don't get stuff like that. So the answer to that question is building relationships with the Departments of Transportation. That you're not, wishy-washy, you're not adversarial, but you're building a relationship and you help them understand what our vision is. And if we don't have a comp plan, we don't really have a vision, but a
They
lot of that.
supplement tax dollars too, town tax dollars towards the state budget for that road as well.
Right, but why do some towns get more tax dollars? And some of that has to do with that relationship, believe it or not. It's not just allocation by town, it's by that relationship.
Who builds those relationships, though? Town staff, our representatives, town council, or those questions I have.
I
Yeah.
always wanted to know how much our traffic would lessen if they lowered the toll
Yeah.
at the Auburn
Yeah.
toll.
Yeah,
I just
Either that or
wondered-
remove it
That's
entirely.
mentioned in here.
It does,
The toll avoidance is mentioned in
Right.
here, and
there's a lot of truck traffic.
It's
that comes
huge,
through.
it's huge.
I know personally a lot of trucks that bypass that just for
Oh,
that.
yeah.
It's $18 to send
Oh, I
a
bypass
6-axle, 100,000-pound truck through there. I own 5 of them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So.
Why-
it's-
why would you?
It costs me $500 a day to run those trucks a few times through there.
yeah.
That's the bottom line.
why would you do that? You
Yeah.
could not do it.
Yeah.
But it
It's
is
hard.
costing the town of Gray. a
No,
lot
it
to have
is,
that all.
towns and roads.
Yeah.
But as a private business owner, and that brings back to the point with businesses, that's the human element. Somebody's not gonna spend the money,
Yeah.
so.
I got like 2 quick ones. So one, I find that Gray is not walkable.
Yeah.
Pretty
Oh,
much
yeah.
all of this.
Yeah.
They mentioned a couple things in here about the downtown area, maybe the whole, 20, 30 feet of sidewalk that's like actually usable. And then,
And to that walkable thing, that comes back to that grid, we don't have a
Yeah.
grid. So anywhere you wanna walk is a long distance, you're not walking around in a grid.
yeah, and so that's one of the things that they mentioned in here too, is that we have a lot of roads that, where in other communities, they connect them, and here they don't. So like, we have a lot of, dead ends.
Yeah.
And they can only be 3,000 feet long or something, but we have a lot of those, or ways that roads don't connect. So they did talk about that. And then the exit 63 Turnpike interchange sees the highest traffic volume in Gray, with over 20,000 vehicles traveling on Route 202 for 100 west of the Turnpike each day. As
That's
of
huge.
20,
can
as of
believe that.
2016, over 28,000 vehicles per day travel on the main Turnpike in Gray.
I thought that was amazing too. We have almost as much traffic on that section of road as the turnpike does.
So just imagine
Isn't that amazing?
the money that the Turnpike
That's
is
amazing.
pulling in a day.
Let's put in toll roads.
We put it in toll roads for Gray. Yeah, we should get the money.
That's a really good idea, yeah.
Wait, where is that? Where is all that traffic?
Right.
Coming through the Gray
100
Turnpike,
to- Yeah,
actually.
right through the exit 63, that whole.
Yeah, that
interchange
bridge,
in
it sounds
there.
like the
They
bridge
head through
section.
Yeah.
Gloucester and
Yeah.
get to Auburn.
And
Yeah.
in North Wyndham. So that area, that road gets about as much traffic, almost as much traffic as the turnpike.
Mhm.
I like her idea. We should put a toll there.
Just charge them.
I mean, that will keep them on the turnpike if we charge a
And
toll.
the only, the last one I have, the only, like, mass transportation we have is for for disabled folks, that they need transportation to local places and stuff. So they'll come and pick them up and take them places. That's it. That's all we have.
There was one other thing I noticed that's separate from that, which that wasn't there. Was that there was a sentence in here about how we have parking standards in Gray are the same for all parts of town and likely discourage efforts to focus development in the village area.
Parking standard?
Yeah, so basically the standard for parking in the village is the exact same as it is for, I don't know, probably out of Hanford or something. And if it's discouraging development, maybe we should be addressing
I think
changes
that
to
goes
that.
with some of the housing stuff
Yeah,
that you guys have brought
that
up.
reminded me of that
Mhm.
earlier.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, number 7, historic and archaeological resources.
Can we mentioned, like, when we have this open forum thing, ask if there is a greater need for public transportation or senior transportation? Because I'm not aware of these companies that are driving people around. Is it one guy transporting 30 people, or is it 30 companies transporting 100 people? So if we have them, I'm not sure how they're known or made known to people that they're available.
Seems like social services.
All right.
So, yeah, I think I was the only guy on that. I'll keep it quick, so I know we're pressed for time. But
What's the
so it's historic and archaeological resources. I noted that Gray was founded in 1736. It was dedicated by Mass General Court, and it got settled in 1738 after all the roads were cut. It had to be resettled after Indian attacks, and then you've got more development. So basically it breaks down in the previous comprehensive plan into 6 villages. So it identifies them. It's Gray Village, Dry Mills, West Gray, East Gray, North Gray, and South Gray, which is pretty, I don't know, pretty generic, aside from the village and Dry Mills.
That's exciting.
I mean, it's actually a pretty non-inclusive, in my mind, chapter, but it did mention there was a few archaeological sites. Looked like there was like 4 of them. I wasn't aware of them, and the font was really, I couldn't read it on the map, so I just noticed that there was a few, and then it breaks it down to a table, and there's only 2 in the table. It shows 4 on the map, 2 on the table. And then it gave a list of, it looked like the historic structures, and most of them were municipal buildings and municipal owned, one being right here, and Dry Mill School, and then Freeman Farm Historic District and Stimson Memorial Hall. And then it looked like it broke down a list of homesteads, farmsteads, and they just identified them. And the plan plan for historic preservation was basically education about the historic district. It didn't give any action aside from education and educating the public, and that's basically where they left it. So it's kind of an open-ended chapter, really, in my eyes, just on a general overview.
Do we actually have a historic district?
Yeah,
it
we have a
say?
historic, yes.
We do?
No, not a district, it's
Oh.
a,
It's a-
society, Gray Historical Society.
Oh, I know we
yes.
have a historic
But that's it, there's no
society, but
district or anything.
There's no district or,
It doesn't identify more than
Anything.
just individual buildings and what they are,
I
and,
feel like that's something the town could like,
yeah,
that
and,
history part,
Push
like
on.
in developing tourism and
Yeah.
agritourism, that's something we should like,
yeah.
because it's so old and there's like, that's American
Sure.
history, like, I feel like.
Yeah, we should definitely
That's
expand
like
on
the
this
missing
after
boat
the
thing
inventory
there,
for
yeah.
sure. Yeah, we need to.
I think, isn't there a site for the first woolen mill?
That's what
Yeah.
I want to talk about.
Yeah.
One thing
Mail.
Yeah.
I've always thought is ironic.
Operated
is
till
that-
1909, and
Yep.
it was the first mechanical woolen mill in the country.
Yep.
Yeah.
I never knew that till I moved
Yep.
there, like, I
Right,
mean,
but
you
Yeah.
you see
just
that,
don't know
you see
about
that
it, like.
in a number of different places, that's like a claim to fame historically,
But yet
But-
we don't promote it
but
at all.
it'd be nice if you could actually go there and, I mean, it's basically in ruins right now, and it's on
Yeah.
private
Yeah.
property, I believe.
Yeah.
But it would
Yeah.
be nice if somehow we could have a replica or have it reconstructed or something, because that is like, you hear that every time, it's just like, but you can't go see it. It's
Yeah.
like-
Basically, they just
We can't-
identify
we can't
these things.
capitalize on it.
Right, it's all on private
Yeah.
property by the looks, and most of it, and then the ones municipally owned, like this place has been done nicely, and that's what it shows. You know,
Definitely
that's the extent
something
of
to
it.
capitalize on.
Yep.
And I think up on Libby Hill, there is some historical site there, I can't remember what it is now. But they have a bench there,
Yeah.
Commemorating-
It's the foundation.
yep,
It's the
commemorating that.
foundation is just there
and-
and stuff.
Hardly anybody knows anything about that except for the people who maintain Libby Hill. I mean, there is another historical of interest site. And probably the Historical Society could give us more, but
Public facilities?
public facilities.
I was on public facilities. It was very cut and dry, telling you what we have in the property. I think it should allude more to the problems, and rather than just say, we have 3,000 square foot. And in that 3,000 square foot, we have 8 offices, so I just think there's not a lot of discussion points from it, other than people can voice their opinion on these services the town provides.
Does it talk about the condition or the occupancy for that?
It doesn't talk about like the condition as far as needing repairs, because it didn't go that direction.
Well, there is Stimson Hall, which.
That one, yeah.
Yeah.
Street- Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that, I know, like, I forget what year it was, I think it was 2012, the town voted to either sell that property or tear it down. But then there's been all this planning to, there was like an application for a community development block grant that didn't get approved. And I think it's just on hold, what we're doing with that space, but there is like a plan for a park over there eventually. I was curious what's become of that, or what's the latest.
Sold.
It did sell?
Yeah, so-
We
Oh,
don't own it anymore.
oh, okay. Well, too much for the park, but,
The street name for the library is wrong.
yeah.
Yes.
Also, it noted that we have K to 12 for MSAD 15, it's actually pre-K to 12. And the middle school is not 6 through 8, it's 5 through 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
The library was, the basement of the library is developed, so I don't,
Yeah.
I honestly don't know, like, who wrote these
I did find some
chapters,
errors.
and like, I don't know where the data came from, so I was just curious that we should be cautious.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think in my experience, this is probably the hardest chapter to get a handle on unless you've got some real good inside knowledge. So as the folks who are writing this, they're sitting in Portland and at GP Cog, they don't have the same knowledge that, and I think that's part of what we're doing tonight, starting to, but we need to like just proof and
There-
truth.
Yeah.
these things.
There was, and I can't remember which chapter was, one of the earlier ones, it mentioned the narrow gauge railroad
Yeah.
was moving here, and
Right.
I'm
Okay.
pretty
It's
sure
not
that's
That's
dead.
gone.
They wrote that more than a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was gone
Yeah.
because they couldn't get approval
yeah.
for the
Um,
for the
so-
wetlands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think these chapters are weak in the sense they don't hint at some of the problems, because they're not even written to current day capacity, like,
Mhm.
I think there was a bond since I've been here, to improve the middle school,
There was.
and that's not even referenced in here, so.
Yeah, also,
Well,
we
it
purchased,
does,
we
it does
purchased.
reference some, it does talk about the acreage of
The soccer fields, the baseball fields, that's the only thing that it says, like, we need to improve those.
No,
but-
it says the school site is, under Russell School, the school site is less than 5 acres, which does not meet the minimum state recommended size of 8 acres.
Right.
23 acres is the preferred size.
Yeah, but like, is there a problem with that? I would say.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to, yeah, I mean, I think that's up for us to decide, right? And it also says vehicular access to the site is challenging. So, I mean,
You could say
there, I
that.
mean, I think it's up to us to decide whether these are problems that need to be addressed. It's sort of like the police and, you know, we don't have our own
say.
police force, it's state police. Is that a problem? I don't know. I mean, personally, I don't think so, because I've never had any problems that, you know, calling the state police didn't solve, but there might be other people in
Yeah.
other parts of town who feel like, I need, you know, I want a local police force. So I think some of these things are being pointed out as, you know, potentially problems, potentially, I think that's what we have to sort of decide and then say, okay, this is how we want it to go move
Right,
forward.
so I mean, I just think some of the data is weak, and then I think it doesn't allude to some of the problems, like the transfer station has issues that are not even brought in here. So I don't know how and when, where those issues come about, like lack of space for the fire department, lack of space for public works, condition of the buildings, and that kind of thing. So,
And it's kind of minutia, but also recycling rates. They said that Gray has a 48% recycling rate, but if you go on the EcoMaine website, it's only quoted as 17% recycling for Gray, and that's actually very low for Cumberland County.
17 is super low.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe either making sure that which one is right,
Yeah.
first of all, and then if it's 17%, that's a problem that we might want to address.
no, we have a very good recycling
I-
rate, because
Yeah.
EcoMaine uses different criteria, so that has to be qualified, like
Okay.
why they have that rate.
Okay,
We've-
well,
I think
so this-
Randy would probably take issue.
Yeah, no, we.
Oh, I think you would.
No, I mean, if anything, I want recycling rates to increase, but at the same time, the cost of recycling's really gone up in the last year or two because the international
Yeah.
markets
Yeah,
are
like,
taking
yeah,
us.
that, there's,
Yeah,
there's
and they don't
potential
address,
issues
they
that
don't address all that.
aren't, yeah.
And according to some of the articles I've read lately from Randy, that recycling has changed, that you can't any longer have bottle caps with your bottles that you recycle, because they just get in the way and gum up the machines and,
Leave them on the refundables.
oh yeah, even on the
No,
refundables.
you should
Oh.
leave them on the refundables, we asked. On the refundables.
But the ones you take to the transfer station,
Yeah, we take our refundables there too.
okay, all right, good for you.
So we have
But there
about
are all sorts of,
5 minutes left, and we've got like we have one recreation left, and we got 2 quick topics, so, or well, 1 quick topic,
We'll
one
make
maybe
it
not so quick, so.
Quick. I got recreation, so I can make that really quick.
okay.
So amenities is New Begin Community Center over here, Wilkes Beach, Libby Hill Trails. That's it. So that sums that up. And then we also utilize, or tend to utilize, our school recreational facilities, which, yeah. So I guess, all in a nutshell, we have nothing, pretty much. And this town has done nothing for open space, parks, room to build. So obviously, I think if you're all paid attention to the last vote, we put aside we voted to do $50,000 in a fund for, to buy purchase land in the future, right? But next, we've got a whole lot of nothing.
Didn't we have a bond, though, that approved the purchase of land behind the high school and middle school a few years ago? And then I believe it was purchased, and then
That
we
was-
also voted to build it out, and then it was, the town voted that down.
Are you talking school bond, or are you talking town
No,
bond?
it was a town bond to purchase land for school purposes. It's like,
I believe there was one for the school, but anyway,
Yeah.
I believe that some was purchased, but I don't
right.
know the whole ins and outs of it.
So I'm just, yeah, the town voted down not developing it, so it's just sitting there as far as I know.
How long ago was that?
What year was that? I think it was
It's been a couple
2012,
years ago.
2013.
It wasn't in that,
2012,
so-
2013, it was 2012 for the vote, and then you're supposed to, the referendum failed to expand it in 2014 and 2016.
I'll ask about that.
Yeah. Also, I had this same chapter. There was, the Wilkes Beach is often closing due to E. coli in the summer.
Yep.
That's one of the few places we have access to lakes in this area. I'm just curious if we've identified why it's getting.
We didn't close it all this year.
No, we didn't.
No,
You're right.
yeah.
But,
It's probably sewage though. I mean,
Right.
That's what's.
It's due to geese,
Yeah,
they were-
geese and ducks.
thing on that yet? Oh, no, all right.
I've heard so many different stories. That's why I'm curious if there's actually.
It's a combination.
And then I just want to say that the rec department here does a great job. I don't know, I think the programs have been, they're really expanding the programs lately. I think there's a lot more variety for all ages. It did note that there's a playground here and an ice skating rink on this, and lifeguarded swimming, and I was wondering where those are. Because I don't.
Yeah.
The ice skating rink has been in the basketball court.
Right.
And they didn't do
They
it
flood
last
it and
year.
freeze it.
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that is a thing. And then where's the playground?
The playground is not there.
Right, there's no
And I
playground,
would've,
right?
I was so sure that it was, and you and I had this discussion,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I did my little run. It doesn't
There's no
exist.
playground.
I don't know what I was
When I
thinking.
first moved to Gray 3 years ago, there was a pinpoint behind this building that said there was a playground here. I remember
And I
it
walked it,
specifically.
yeah, with my kids. Like,
And because
we're
I
just
first
like,
came here, I'm like, there's a sand pit
Isn't,
where there's
isn't there a
volleyball.
playground over at
Behind
the
Russell.
Well,
There's
Yeah.
a school.
but there's no community playground. You
Right.
can't use that,
During the day.
During the school day. you
Oh,
can,
during the
but-
school day,
Yeah.
on the weekends you could.
Yeah,
Yes,
right,
or
yeah.
after school.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So-
The equipment's stacked up behind Public Works.
Yeah. Well, he was noting it as being in the New Begin complex, which there's no
Well,
playground
yeah,
here, so
there
that
should
should.
be sand volleyball court.
No, that was a separate list, so it was, yeah.
In that same chapter on page 5, under community events, we should spell gray right where it talks about the
Yeah.
Blueberry Festival. That would be nice.
All right, and then, any last thoughts on that? Good?
No.
All right. So, update on October public visioning workshop, dates, locations?
So, I am working with Doug to narrow down where this is going to take place and when it is going to take place. The venue and date are very much tied together, so depending on the appropriate space will dictate when the meeting can be. So, I do not have final locations or dates for those October meetings at this point.
How big does the venue need to be? Like, does the meeting room at the library work? It's 50 people, right?
I think it's gonna be more than that, so that kind of eliminates that space.
Well, what about the gym where we vote? I mean,
That's a
That's
possibility.
pretty big.
We gotta coordinate that with Parks and Rec and make sure we have the gym floor covered and all that good stuff, but that could be a possibility. I think the capacity in here is probably, could be big enough, but it might not be, so that's the
What
problem.
plus parking?
Parking, that too. Upstairs is a bigger space, but it lacks the technology component, so we're working on it. We guessed 60, we kind of all kind of guessed how many might come to that first meeting, and we thought maybe 60, but, then you said Wyndham had a higher turnout than that on, so it's just, but it's a bigger community. So, yeah,
Can we use space at the schools, or do we need approval from the?
you
school
have to
district?
ask, yeah.
What are we looking at? What are we looking at for a day? What time? Look,
We
weekday
had
or
talked
weekend?
about a Saturday and we talked about a weekday. So either a Thursday and the following Saturday, or a Wednesday and the following Saturday, or a Saturday and the following Monday. We talked about holding these relatively close together, so they weren't 2 weeks apart, for example. But it is very common to use a school gym or a cafeteria. Doug had also mentioned that he was gonna inquire about the facility, Inland Fisheries' new conference space. That could be an option. I think it's really hard to guess, but I think we've kind of been ballparking somewhere between 50 and 80 people at a meeting like this. And if it's on the high end, this room would work for that size group. So, you could get a room planning for up to 100 and get 40.
But I think,
That happens.
what's the format? Is it gonna be small table of discussion, or, because you want more space than here, if you have a lot of
Yeah.
people talking at once?
Yep, and I think that the format is something we're gonna talk more about next time. The information that we've heard this evening and the information that we've gotten from some of the department head interviews, those took place a couple weeks ago. That got more into issues with departmental space, for example, that isn't captured in the inventory. So we've been talking about ideas of presenting information, having small group work, being able to report back to the group. We'll probably need some space to walk around and do things, and maybe have some wall space that is a little limited in this facility. But, you know, I think the main thing is getting the date and location nailed down, and then we can plan the specifics around the space.
Well, there are two things. I understood that Cumberland Farms built conferencing space in its upstairs of its building. And also that the Congregational Church Parish House right next to it has a fairly good space on that main floor. So, I mean, it won't take 200, but,
Yeah, parking.
yeah,
So
parking, the town parking
I'll
lot.
talk with Doug, and
Right.
we will try and nail that down. I don't think that there's, you know, there's nothing wrong with having it at a church hall or facility
house.
like that. So for me, you know, it's mid-September, and I was looking at the timeline today. It's gonna be important to have these wrapped up in October. It's very possible. I can foresee a scenario where these things are gonna wanna go into early November, but I'm doing my best to make sure that they don't at this point, so we can stay on as close to that schedule as we can.
So do we need the additional prep meeting for the vision, for the public visioning?
My sense is that we will need one, and I think that was expressed at our last meeting. I don't know, maybe it's at this point a doodle poll to see who's got availability. It seems like Mondays are gonna be a little tough for people between now and the middle of October. So having a meeting on, I don't know, has this group ever met on a Wednesday?
Actually, probably in the, not this week, but the week after and the week after that, with Cumberland Fair and Freiburg Fair, availability for many people may be limited.
That is a possibility. But my sense is that we'll be better prepared going into a mid to late October meeting if we can meet one more time before our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is the third Monday in October.
And you'd get down listed 5 minutes for that?
The discussion about our next regular meeting, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So is 9:30 a good date for that?
I can't be here, but
that
doesn't mean it shouldn't happen.
No, I can't be here.
Yeah, and it actually, you know, that was the date I had put out, and Sarah's like, what are you doing? You have another meeting that night. Sorry.
That doesn't work then?
So I think we're gonna need to, you know, probably just do it.
Okay, cool, sounds good.
Okay, cool.
3 minutes over. That's not too bad, Justin.
Not bad.
For your first meeting.
Thanks.
So we're not meeting on November or September 3rd?